A wise man once told me there's two things that you never want to mess with on a hot rod: steering and brakes. I sure found that out. If you've seen any of my other videos on this truck, you know that it's sitting on the chassis of a 1975 Chevy C10. The original e-brake on this thing was a pull lever that was like underneath the dash and stuff. But when I did the swap, I also swapped out the steering column. And in order to have room, I had to remove that whole box with the e-brake assembly. And I had originally planned on reusing the e-brake cables and everything from this 1975 donor truck. It's one of those things that I never really needed until I needed it. So, it's high time to get to work on the old sissy pedal. What we're going to be installing today is this ESTOPP. Let's open up the box and take a look-see in here. Here you've got the control box, which is your brains of the operation. There's the button for it. Here's the actuator itself. This kit that I bought did not come with the bracket for it, but this bracket was like 30 bucks. This actually ensures that your cables are being pulled perfectly straight. However, it does look like this one needs some cable stops, which I'll have to address at a later point. All right, let's take a look-see at the instructions. First, you want to make sure that the actuator is fully extended, and to do that, we got to hook it up to a 12-volt battery source, which I think I've got a battery source. How about the battery itself? Red wire to positive, blue wire to ground. And well, it's making noises, but it's not actually moving. Well, according to the instructions, if you hook it up to the power source and it doesn't move, it's fully extended. It says this is normal, so that's probably the way it comes in the package. But just to double check and make sure, hook it up to a power source. We're fully extended, so we're good to go. So the next step is to find a flat spot on your frame to mount it to. A couple of things to keep in mind is the length of the electrical wire. I want it to go up my firewall, through the firewall, underneath the dash. So I want it to be kind of close to the front. And actually the wiring coming off of the transmission goes right up some brackets, and that might be a good place to kind of route it. Also being careful not to get too close to exhaust or in the way of anything that's going to be moving. Also, since my e-cables come through this bracket right here, and then got to come under this cap mount right here and be perfectly straight. So I think I want to mount it up here, so that way it comes across here, kind of hits right through here. Do you know what I mean? Right about here probably is about the right spot. Well, as you can see, this is kind of like, I don't want to pull it any tighter than that. I've got a little bit of slack to be able to go through the firewall here. I don't want to go any farther back on the frame because otherwise I'm going to lose my cable length here. All right, well, I got this thing kind of temporarily mounted to the frame. I just put a couple of bolts through. I think it's where I want it though. And I started taking a look at my old cables. I think it's time to replace them. Again, this is sitting on the chassis of a 1975, so that makes it, what, like 100 years old almost. So I got this universal kit off of Amazon, and I'll put the link down in the description for you. It's like 40 bucks, and it comes with all of the stuff that you really need, so you kind of don't really need that bracket. But I'm gonna use that anyway since I already installed it. So we'll rip out all of the old cables, and we'll install this one here. One tech tip though, whenever you're doing these weird drum brakes, there's a lots of springs, brackets, all this other stuff that has to go back in the exact same spot. So I would recommend doing them one at a time, so in case you forget where something goes, you can look at your other side, take a picture, whatever you need to remember where everything goes, so that way you can put it back. Brakes are important. All right, I got that old cable out of there and I put the new one in there. I ended up cutting the old cable out of there because on the inside of this thing are these little guys right here. And these little jerks are a pain in the butt to get off. As you can see, I kind of tried to really get it off of there. You can try to do the socket trick where you put a socket over it and it pushes these ears down. But if you're not trying to save the cable, might as well just cut it off, right? Yeah, you jerk. The spring is important because when you pull on it, you're gonna want it to release. So it's important that that's on there. The spring is really easy to install. You just take the cable out. yada, yada, yada. The other thing is this bracket up under here is meant to hold this cable in place so it doesn't get pulled tight. You want some slack on this because when your rear end goes up and down, it needs to be able to move. You don't want to pull your brake while you're going over bumps and stuff. That would not be very fun. So I come up with a real simple solution for that. I'm just going to use these washers that are big enough for the cable housing to go through, and then clamp them down with some hose clamps. That'll keep that in place. And then we also have to cut this to length. So I'm going to mount this all the way to the bracket, put this little end cap on here through the holes, and I got about equal threads on either side. So I got a little bit of adjustment either way. And that cable is going to sit inside of there about a ½ an inch or so. Mark it with my pen, tape the cable out of it so I can cut the housing, and then we're ready to install it and finish up the brakes and then do the other side. Good times. All right, I got both cables run and they're all mounted in there using these little brackets going into here, cut to length. So now we can confirm that these are connected to the brakes just by pulling them like so. Yep, those are good to go. So now we need to put some kind of cable stop on these to hold them in place. And here's what you can do. You can go to the hardware store and buy some, or you can make your own. All this is a 1/4 inch coupler. Just drilled a hole in there for the cable to go through and then put a bolt in there. And that'll cinch down onto the cable and hold it in place. Of course, you want to Loctite this. You can do set screws if you want to, one on either end, just to make sure it's secure. Loctite it and those will never move. You probably do want a little bit of tension on these things. I'm gonna make adjustments and then I'm gonna actually Loctite these as well. All right, well now that I got this all kind of connected, it feels like it's sort of tight and in place and where it's gonna wanna be. Before I do anything else, I'm going to actually test it. So I'm gonna hook up the control box to the battery, push the button, see what happens. Well, it definitely pulled the cables. Let's check out this tire here. Well, it's definitely locked down. That's good. Check the passenger tire. Feels like that's locked down too. So now I'll push the button to release it. Okay, now we'll check the tires. Yep. That's spinning free. That's also spinning free. Well, I think it can be a little bit tighter, which is this adjustment right here. So I think I'm just gonna cinch that up a little bit more, lock her down, and then next step, wiring. So here's a little bit more detail on the control box. As you can see, there's wires coming out both ends. These two wires on this side that are all by themselves, those go directly to your actuator. Red goes to brown, black goes to blue. And then on the other side of the box, you've got a handful of wires. A lot of them are already connected to the button, so don't gotta worry about those. There is an empty green wire. You can hook it up to like an LED light or some kind of a brake light that lets you know that your e-brake is activated. The blue wire is for a safety. That one will go to your ignition, and that will not allow it to run while your ignition is on. I kind of want to use this as a true e-brake, not just as a parking brake. So I'm going to leave that one off, but they recommend hooking that up so you don't accidentally lock up the tires and hit the button. The ones that we're mostly concerned about are these black and red ones. Those are the ones we're going to connect to the battery. You can go to a battery source in your fuse box. They also say you can put a fuse in line, or you can run it direct if you feel really confident about not burning your vehicle down. The instructions also say to not couple the ESTOPP wires with other electrical wires because you can get interference. Speaking of putting the button where you're not accidentally going to hit it while you're driving, I'm going to mount this in a place where I can reach it and not accidentally bump it. You can also make this kind of a theft deterrent feature by mounting this button somewhere else where only you know where it is. But I'm gonna mount mine right here. That seems like that's in a good spot where I actually have to think about pushing that button. It's away from any other button. Problem is my brake light switch is right here. So I'm gonna have to figure out where I'm gonna relocate that. So we'll make sure we disconnect the battery, but first we gotta find a good port to be able to plug into for battery power. So we'll just get our test light out here. With the ignition off, there's a battery port there. There's one over here as well. Power windows, those are all ignition. Looks like one of these down here on the bottom is probably going to be the winner. So there's that guy. Battery power. Battery power. That's going to be the winner. Now that we found our ports, now we can go disconnect the battery so that we don't cause any damage to the control box. So I made up this aluminum bracket here, put the button in there, but in order to get the button in there, you gotta kind of unplug it. And they make it really easy because there is a clip that all you gotta do is unhook it, take your nut off the button, and then fish it through the hole. Cinch it back up and you're good. Alright, I think I found a good spot for it. This is right above my steering column. Underneath the dash, I want to kind of mount it to the firewall right there. The wires are all going to reach. There's the fuse box down there. The wires from the actuator can come through that same grommet in the firewall where all the other wires come from. And the button is directly down here, so that's going to be an easy reach. So that's going to be the perfect spot for it. So I got this Velcro. I'm going to stick on the back of this and stick it to the firewall. That should hold it in place. Now that we got all the wires hooked up, we can hook up the battery again, and then we'll give it one final test before I button everything up. Okay, here we go. Light stays on. There it goes out. 10 seconds later. Let's see if it releases. Seems to be working. That beeper is pretty loud, and I've heard of some guys putting like tape or a piece of like some felt or something over it. I kind of want it loud because my truck is loud, so I kind of want to be able to hear it in case it, for some weird reason, doesn't work. So I'm gonna leave mine nice and loud. So now I'll just kind of button the rest of my dash up here, tuck some wires in, zip tie them down, and then we'll move on to the final adjustments. Well, I got this pretty well wrapped up. I cut these cables down to length, got these adjusted. I opted for going with set screws in there instead of that bolt. I put one in the top and the bottom on both sides. This piece is just a little 1/4-inch piece of copper pipe just to keep the wire from fraying and stabbing you to death. This is adjusted, pulled it a little bit tight just so there's no slack in there. And I opted for going with nuts on either side of this pull bar right here. So that way that's completely clamped down. Everything is Loctited, and I think now it's just time to go test it to see if it'll actually stop me while I'm cruising down the road. I don't have high expectations of this stopping me at highway speeds, but let's just see normal traffic speeds, how it does. Well, final thoughts. This thing is pretty simple to install. I did have to buy a few other things that I ended up using on my setup here, which you may or may not have to. When I first got this thing set up, I only had one tire that would lock up, so I had to kind of tighten the other side, and now I got both tires locking up. As an emergency brake, I don't know if it functions so well as an e-brake, because it takes about 60 feet or so to stop, at least in my situation with drum brakes, and it being lightweight over the rear end, and I slid for a little bit, and that's at 20 something miles per hour. So if you're in an actual emergency going any faster than that, it's gonna feel like an eternity for this thing to stop. But for a theft deterrent, parking brake, hidden button thing, if you want to use that, it works awesome because it does lock your truck down and it will not move. Would I buy it again? Probably. But I might do a backup system with a lever because if I need something in a hurry, you got to have something in a hurry. Anyway, I hope this helped you out. If it did, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you check out the links down here for social media. Get yourself a t-shirt over here. Subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.